When we look at the albums that are turning 5 years old in 2022, we have albums like Kendrick Lamar's Damn, Tyler the Creator's Flower Boy, and so many modern albums that have been so impactful on the culture. So today, we'll be answering the question, are these albums from 2017 classics or not? And let us know in the comments if you think these albums are classics or not. Go through the motions with us. So we thought it was fitting because they're turning 5 years old. A lot of people kind of have 5-year rules, 10-year rules or 20-year rules for these classics. But if you're on that side of needing, let's say, 10 or more years, go through with it in the sense of, will this maybe be a future classic? So how would you define a classic? Because everybody has a different term, but to everybody who's calling the off-season or Dawn the classic, it's way too fucking soon, guys.
Yeah,
let's keep it real.
There has to be some sort of time that has passed, and I believe it's excellence over an extended period of time. So that extended period of time could be subjective. You know, some people have 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 70 years,
You're
whatever
too quick
it is.
on it, though.
But there's certain ones that I think that are undeniable from the get-go where you could see it. Example, I think the first undeniable classic that I saw was Daytona, and that's only been released for, I believe, 4 years now. So it's still in that conversation. But let's actually start off this list with Damn, because this was a polarizing album for the fan base in the way that people didn't necessarily understand it too much at first. But as time has gone on, this has been a really solid album. Won a Pulitzer Prize, the first hip-hop album to ever do so. Massive commercial appeal as well, sold over 600,000 units first week, while having this super knit and I would say impactful concept throughout the whole track list. So I think when you look at the scope of it, Damn is a classic in my eyes, dude. Like what it did for the culture, the quality of the work, the performance, what it did, on another scale as far as achievements go. No album has done what Damn has done in its own respective. So that's at least my opinion.
I definitely agree with the Pulitzer Prize, because if you look at how reflective and spiritual the writing is on this album, you have to give it to him. And going back to the commercial success of the album too, it's crazy that an album that is that lyrically dense and conscious is able to put up those kinds of numbers. Because if you look at the mainstream hip-hop albums nowadays, they don't put up numbers like that if they're that conceptual and lyrical. So this shows a new generation that you could still blow up and be mainstream and reach the masses while being super lyrical and keeping up the roots of traditional rapping, I would say. And I think this album is very artistic too, because you could play it from track 1 to 14, or you could play it in reverse from Duckworth to Blood and have two different meanings for the concept of the album. And that's what I love, because great art is often left open to interpretation. And that's what I feel like Damn does. And again, I just think that what he was able to do here was game-changing. So Cornrow Kenny gets the classic on this one for me. So let's now move on to the next one. But before we do, we actually have polls from Twitter. We asked the community on Twitter if all of these albums are classic or not. So the official poll reads 80% of Twitter says Damn is a classic, 20% says Damn is not a classic. And that's based on over 1,800 votes. So thank you to everybody that voted on these. But let's now go on to Tyler the Creator's Flower Boy. And I think this album is a classic, and I'll tell you why. It was so transformative for Tyler the Creator, because if you look at all his projects prior to this, you had, let's say, homophobic lyrics. You had more of an aggressive approach. And on this track list, he made a statement for all of hip-hop where he embraced who he was. He spoke openly about his sexual orientation, and that ended up influencing other artists to be as open and as vulnerable as they want to be about their personal life if they want to in the music. And I think that will forever change the course of hip-hop, because what he did, what Brockhampton did, is game-changing. And apart from that, it's one of the most genre-bending albums. If you look at the neo-soul inspiration and how gorgeous and lush the production was, you never got that from Tyler before. So are you on the same page? Is it a classic?
I'm iffy about this one, because I think that it's an incredible album. I think that it's top 3 in his discography, and we actually did a discography ranking for Tyler the Creator. So if you guys want to go watch that, click the link. But my thoughts on Flower Boy is that, yes, I think that, it is one of the strongest in his discography. It is genre bending because of the neo soul, and I think everything goes on with it. But is it really a classic?
Yeah.
Like, is it a really, like,
Absolutely.
Is it that classic status? Okay.
If you look at Tyler's evolution, this is the key ingredient to it. And like I said, if you're looking at the way that this, bended so many genres, I think it will be influential for years to come. And like I said, when Tyler dropped a song like Garden Shed and the impact, the meaning behind that, that's not something that you saw often in hip hop. So I feel like it will affect the culture if it hasn't already.
That is facts, though. Yeah,
So,
on that end, it did
I
really
think
did.
I think
impact
it's a classic.
No,
I think we got to
all
give
right.
it to it.
We'll give it the classic status. What did the Twitter poll say, by the way, on this?
75% said that it was a classic, and 25% said that it was not a classic, and that's based on 1,712 votes. So cool to see what you guys think of it. But let's go on to the next album on this list, and it's Culture by the Migos. And listen, you cannot deny the cultural impact that this project had, because they came in with this refreshing flow, their triplet flow, which they introduced on Versace, they brought back on Culture, and this is where it really made an impact, because you started seeing rappers like J. Cole, Meek Mill, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, the biggest rappers in the game, use this similar flow. And yes, they did not invent it, but they brought it back to the masses during this time. And from track 1 to track 13, bro, it's slapper after slapper. It doesn't stop.
It's one of the best trap albums to ever be released, in my opinion. And comes out at a time where, like, you look at where hip hop was at in the United States, it officially had became the most listened to genre in the US at the time. And this was one of the first albums, I feel as if, that really took trap and push it even further. And you look at what, let's say, DS2 did, or Barter 6 did, or other trap projects from 2016 did.
On the same level.
It's on that same level for me, because the impact was undeniable. How many people were trying to make albums like Culture and have those types of slappers? It literally took the whole Atlanta scene and flipped it on its head. And that's what I appreciate about Culture, was trap was never done like that before. That atmospheric and sort of, I'm not trippy, but like, I don't even know how to explain the fucking production, bro, because it's so mesmerizing, bro. Like, it gets you into a type of zone that only projects like DS2 or Barter 6 do for me. Only, albums like, let's say, 56 Nights, or, let's say, I don't know, Lil Uzi Vert versus the World do for me. So, like, that's what I love about Culture, is that it was so prominent at its time, and everyone was bumping this album, bro. Like, the cultural impact of Culture was fucking incredible.
Not only that, but think about like how groups in hip hop, successful groups, had kind of disappeared for quite some time. And then you get the Migos coming in with undeniable chemistry. You have Quavo who's killing the fucking hooks. You have Takeoff, who has some of the coldest flows in the trap scene. And it was just a perfect storm. And for that reason, I think it will age as a classic if it's not one already, because of moments like Bad and Bougie, where you have Donald Glover shouting them out at the Golden Globes, because of the music video of T-Shirt. You had so many moments and some of the best production, like you said, from Zaytoven, Metro Boomin, and so many others. But taking it on to Twitter, the majority does agree with us. 56% of Twitter says that Culture is a classic, while 44% says that it's not a classic.
All right, so the closest we've got
a bit more mixed, 1,589 votes on that one. Let's now go with 444 by Jay-Z, and
this is a classic. I don't even want to talk about it like that. Like,
you got to talk about it.
I know, just figure of speech, but I'm just saying, like, I think that this is one of the only projects on this list, along with Flower Boy and Damn, maybe, because I don't know, I feel as if I was a bit too harsh with Flower Boy, that are like undeniable classics for me, especially looking at what this means to Jay-Z's career, the cultural impact of this album, and how many people were going through this project and were reading the lyrics, line per line and bar per bar. Like, I remember watching Everyday Struggle, let's say, and bro, everyone was trying to decipher what Jay-Z was saying, because this was the first time he also had spoken about the whole situation with Beyonce, and this was the first time where you see a billionaire mogul be so vulnerable on one of the biggest stages in the world. And that had promoted so many other people to do so. Example, 444 came out at a time where rap was at its most braggadocious. You had a lot of rappers that were putting up fake stunting and that were, really in their sort of image bag. And what 444 did for me was kind of like show a different perspective to the fame, show how there's, deeper and rooted problems into all of the success and luxury that hip-hop was not necessarily highlighting at the time, especially in such a plastic phase. So I think that for what it did for the culture, it moved people into different directions, and people were able to get vulnerable with it. I believe there was even rappers who talked about, like, I believe it was Meek Mill saying, like, once I heard 444, I ended up having to, like, go make more vulnerable music, and it prompted me to be, more vulnerable with my music.
And you know why? So it's because it took 20 years for Jay-Z to give us his most personal offering, and he's literally holding a mirror up to his face, and he's able to pick out those flaws that he sees. And I think that's showing so much maturity from Jay-Z, from someone that for his entire career had this Godfather and this machoism to his music. for him to actually be self-reflective, be so vulnerable was game-changing. And this is the first Jay-Z album where he actually has production credits, because I don't know if you know this, but he had a playlist that he was playing around the house and he showed it to No ID. It had songs from Marvin Gaye, Nina Simone, and so many other legendary acts. And No ID picked out samples from those songs that Jay-Z was bumping. So it was cool to even see him have an effect on that. And like you said, I love how culturally Jay-Z was so on point, talking about how, you know, the money phones you're holding up to your ear, we don't call that money over here. And just talking about, you gave me 20 minutes, I gave you 20 million without blinking, you gave me 20 minutes on stage, what the fuck were you thinking? Like, he covered so much groundwork of what was happening in the culture, especially on Family Feud, where he's talking about the gap between old rappers and new rappers. So for Jay-Z, I think it's a landmark album and it will age as a classic. But let's see what you guys said on Twitter. 66% of Twitter said 444 is a classic. 34% of people said that it's not. I think that 34% is tripping. I'm not going to lie.
That's facts. No, it's definitely a classic in my books. But let's go on to More Life. This was one of the most commercially successful albums of 2017. It's not an album. It's an EP. It's an extended play. So it did a bit less.
He calls it a playlist.
He calls it a playlist. So still, you put up 505,000 copies first week with a playlist. That is very impressive in my eyes. But I think where More Life strives is bringing in so many different genres into the hip-hop lane, or a hip-hop sort of playlist. Like, you're going to get songs like Passion Fruit or Blem that don't have any sort of accents of hip-hop, but that still fit within that hip-hop realm within a track list. I just don't think that the track list is maybe consistent enough as, you know, Damn or Flower Boy or 444 to be able to put it on that sort of quality.
I think it's consistent, but you know what I think the issue is? It's not focus. And I think that's why this album, it did impact the game, but not in a positive way. Because the way that I view it is that because of this whole playlist vibe that he chose to label the album as, that made artists realize, okay, maybe I don't need a sonic direction. Maybe I don't need a narrative from start to finish. Maybe I can just put out a collection of songs and people are going to bump it.
That's
it's going to
facts.
sell, you know, it's going to sell millions of copies nonetheless, even, you know, looking at what Drake did. But I do love the music on this project.
That's facts.
Besides the fact of the way that he packaged it, I love the fact that you get Jamaican dancehall on Blem or Madiba Rhythm. I love the fact that you get UK flows on KMT. Like, Drake really showed his versatility on all fronts here. And I think that it is one of my favorite Drake projects in recent memory, despite me not thinking that it's a classic.
It's one of his most underrated projects,
Yeah.
but it's definitely not a classic. I don't think that it lives up to the stature of the other ones on this list, but let's move on to Love is Rage 2.
Before we get there,
Oh,
the Twitter polls, 22% of Twitter said More Life is a classic, and 78% said that it is not
That's
a
accurate,
classic.
though.
So we're all on the same page, but let's now go on to Love is Rage 2.
So how do you feel
By
about
Lil
this?
Uzi Vert.
How do you feel about this album? Just start off the bat, because we haven't talked about this project
Yeah.
much on it, but I know that it's been heavy in your Uzi listening ship. It has been in mine as well. There's some of his biggest songs ever on this, and the impact that Uzi had on 2017 was fucking inevitable. So
Yeah.
where do you stand with this album?
Not a
You know?
classic. It's definitely not a classic. And I think that when you look at the most iconic eras of Uzi, it's that 2015, 2016 era where he was coming off and really cementing that emo rap style and showing us that he would be a pioneer for this new melodic SoundCloud scene. But with Love is Rage 2, as much as I enjoy it, there's a couple of misses on the track list, and there's more ad-libs than there are bars, which isn't a bad thing, but I feel like Cardi succeeds more at kind of blending in with the production. For Uzi, you still want to listen to what he's saying, and you do get a lot of crooning with melodic songs, but it doesn't always bode over too well. But I do love the production because it's super psychedelic. It's electronic sounding at times too on songs like For Real. So I love the risks that he took, but I just don't think that it moved or impacted the game enough, and I don't think that it's a masterful album.
I don't even think the community talks about it mostly in his catalog like
No.
that too. Like, most people go towards his earlier work, especially his mixtape runs, to be able to prove his longevity and prove what he's done for the game. But nonetheless, it's still quality. But what was Twitter saying about this?
Yeah, so Twitter said 41% of people said it was a classic, and 59% of people said it wasn't a classic.
So same page.
A lot of fans behind it, though. But let's get on to another album that is very appreciated by the fans. It is Without Warning by 21 Savage, Metro Boomin, and Offset. And I'll be straight up about this. To me, and in my listening, it's a classic. But do I think the community will deem it a classic? That I'm not sure about. But let me tell you how much I love this album, because I think that out of every project that's on this list, Metro Boomin sets up atmosphere better than anybody else because you have these haunting trap bells, you have these dusty piano riffs, these spooky organs, you also have sound effects like chainsaws, women screaming. You literally feel like you're in a horror movie. I feel like I'm watching Friday the 13th or I'm watching a Scream movie because it feels like a slasher movie. It's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's short. It's only 11 songs. So to me, I think Without Warning is one of the best collab trap albums to have ever come out. One of my favorite collab albums probably ever in hip hop. And the way that they had chemistry, 21 and Offset on that project, was amazing to me. But I just don't know if the whole community will view it as a classic or if it'll be influential. But what about you?
Listen, I love the project. I think it's one of my favorite on this list, actually. My only thing is that did it really have the impact of culture? Did it really have the impact of self-titled, which we're going to be talking about later on? You know, like I feel as if, yes, the quality of the music is there.
Masterpiece to me.
It's not a classic in my opinion. I just think that it was so solid for when it came out and it dropped on Halloween that it's just one of those projects that's so enjoyed, but it doesn't necessarily have that impact that's going to be like, okay, you know, like I have to see where this is going in 5 years from now. You kind of know what the project is, and I think that I've reached my ceiling with it. You know, like I understand what the album is and I appreciate it for what it is. But what was Twitter saying with it?
Twitter was saying 43% said that it was a classic, 57% said that it wasn't a classic. But again, guys, don't sleep on Without Warning. I mean, you literally have Offset and 21 playing villains in a horror movie, and Metro Boomin serves as the composer. It's fucking brilliant. But let's now go on to The Never Story by Jid. And this is very interesting because I think that what was important about this album when it came out is the fact that when you looked at the Atlanta scene as a whole, they weren't known for their lyricists at the time because it was kind of dominated by Quality Control, by acts like Lil Baby, Migos, and other artists from that region. But it never was looked at for the people that bring the bars. And I think that's where Jid succeeds, is showing that Atlanta is versatile in many styles of hip hop. And this is a great album. I love that he's taking us through kind of his upbringing in East Atlanta. I think that the way that he uses his vocabulary was good because the similes are brilliant. I love the rhyme schemes, but is it different enough? Does it stand out from other similar projects that are about come-up stories? Did it do anything groundbreaking on a production side of things? Not really. And as much as I love both this project and DiCaprio 2, I don't think Jid has a classic yet.
You don't think he has a classic yet? Listen, no. I don't think that this is a classic, but I do think it was groundbreaking, especially for the quirky Atlanta scene and the quirky rap scene. Like, what he was able to do with the cohesion of this project was beautiful, and I love the whole come-up story. I think it was much different because it was different than the way other artists were tackling it, because one, no one ever saw flows or cadences like that on an album. That's one.
Well, two, yeah, they were unique to him, but...
Listen, if you can name me another rapper right now that has a similar flow or cadence to Jid, I will salute you, because I can't think of one right now off the top of my head, and that's what the Never Story did for me. The only thing is that, like, I feel as if it's a classic within the Dreamville's perspective, within that whole Dreamville community. You know, like, people really see it as a staple in, like, how Dreamville was built and what it's done and, where it's gone. But I think when you look at it, it cannot be put on the same level as Damn, Flower Boy, or 444. It just doesn't necessarily get there. So it's not a classic in my eyes, but what did the community say about this?
Community said 21% that it's a classic, 79% said that it was not a classic, and as much as we love the album, I don't think that it has that classic status. But let's now go on to Playboy Cardi by Playboy Cardi, and when this came out, he just blew up off the scene, and I think that it's one of the most consistent trap albums of the last decade. I think that it's a mindless good time, and I've said this before, but I love the fact that Cardi is able to blend his vocals, and it feels like he's part of the production because his ad-libs add to the sonic approach. And I think that what Pierre Bourne did to introduce these beats that had this arcade video game synth, those chiptune synth sounds, was game-changing. But is it a classic like that? I don't know. I feel like
it's a hard
when we look
to
at
have.
Playboy Cardi's catalog, the overall community might view Whole Lotta Red as more of a classic, even though it just came out 2 years ago, rather than this project. And this is my favorite era of Cardi. It's my favorite project of his. But again, I don't think it's a classic project.
It's not a classic project, but I think you can make the discussion for the impact of it, because what you were talking about those chiptune synths and about the Pierre Bourne production and Playboy Cardi's ad libs and the ability to absolutely spit nothing on a verse but making it sound good was revolutionary for its time. And you see how many artists now are trying to capture that same sound that Cardi presented back in 2017. So I don't want to sleep on the impact factor. Again, though, I just don't think that it was necessarily as much of an impact as the first three projects, because you have to kind of hold everything accountable for on the list. And I don't know, man, I have a hard time. Like, I wouldn't necessarily look at you and be like, you're stupid for saying that this is a classic. Like, I feel as if there's definitely an argument to be made, but at the moment, I just don't feel as if it makes the cut. But what was Twitter saying about this one?
Twitter said 38% that it's a classic, 62% said that it was not a classic. But let's now get on to the last project on this list, and it's the Big Fish Theory by Vince Staples. And this is definitely one of my favorite Vince Staples albums. I love that it's very experimental in approach.
Better than Summertime '06?
I don't know, man.
That's a hard question.
That's very tough. But yeah, super experimental. I love the EDM influences, the Detroit techno sounds that he brought into this as well. It was just so different at the time because you didn't get hip-hop albums that brought in those types of sounds. And I mean, in terms of the approach and direction, Vince Staples is so forward-thinking. He's talking about serious subjects like suicide, like fame, like the crab in a bucket mentality. And even the features on this project all killed it. Everybody played their part. And listen, to me, this is a near-perfect album. Does the whole community view it as a classic? I don't know, because too many people are sleeping on Vince, bro.
That's true.
Like, more people need to get, put onto Vince.
I think when you look at the West Coast scene, this is one of the most dynamic albums that came out of that time, and it still is. Like, if you go to Big Fish Theory, the sounds are so advanced for what was being released at that time, and still to this day, that it makes you question why people don't view this as a classic. But I think the only reason why you can't put it in there is because there's not that community consensus. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, you look at Damn, you look at Flower Boy, you look at Culture, 444. Those are viewed as classics, and it rings throughout the whole community. People are like, yes, I remember when I was listening to this album, where I was, who I was with, the parties I went to, or the car I was in when I was playing this music. I just don't see
that's
enough.
More personal, though. I would say more the impact on the game is what kind of should matter.
But there's a multitude of different factors.
Yeah,
there's the personal factor, there's the impact factor, there's the quality in the music. So I think when you look at the diversity within the track list, the quality, and what it means to West Coast hip hop, yes, there's an argument to be made, but I just think it's missing that consensus. Like, okay, the whole community views this as a monumental figure within hip hop. So I feel bad doing this to Vince, but I don't think it's a classic, but I do think it's a near flawless album. That's at least my opinion.
And Twitter said 24% of people said it was a classic album. 76% of people said that it was not a classic album.
So it looks like we're on the same page with the whole community.
We're on the same page with the whole community, to be honest. And it's interesting that it panned out that way. But yeah, I think we have like 4 albums that went into the classic mark, and then another 6 that went into the not classic. And listen, 2017 was a great year for hip hop, and if you guys want us to do this for a different kind of concept, it could be for J. Cole's discography, it could be for 2018 albums, whatever the case may be, let us know down in the comments. And if there's takes that you guys disagree with, also share that with us. We're always down to go through it with you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching the full video, and if you're new to NFR, be sure to hit that subscribe button, as we'll be keeping you guys updated with the latest album releases in terms of update videos, album reviews, and our own original series on the weekly. And we also have our Patreon plan available in the description below, where you can access weekly bonus content and also access to our Discord. So be sure to check out all of that, and we'll catch you in the next one.